Well, hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Hybrid Ministry podcast. My name is Nick Clayson, sipping coffee with you on this beautiful Monday morning. And if you're just listening to this, you're missing out because you didn't get to see me drink out of my beautiful Ohio mug, which I would widely consider to be my home state. Anyway, in this episode, I am excited to talk to you about a really weird kind of topic a little bit, but I'm going to talk to you about my learnings from NBA head coaches and the shift that is happening with the next generation. And so what I mean by that is we are going to dive in a little bit. There was a recent study that came out from The Athletic. I'm a big basketball fan. You guys probably know that about me. There's a big study that came out about the worst coach, the coach that the players would least want to play for. And that was fascinating to me because what that signified was that coach was a very old school coach. What that signified to me was that this means that there is a shifting in the way that people are having things be done. And there is a shifting in the way that people want things, frankly, to be done. And so because of that, I wanted to inspect that just a little bit. It's like, what is going on there? So that's what we're going to be diving into and talking about. But before we do, I just want to remind you that you can follow me over on YouTube. We have a full YouTube channel I post daily shorts as well as a weekly podcast full-length video. It's complete with overlays and statistics, and more we're diving into statistics and things like that. And so if you hear something like, what was that again? It will more than likely be over on YouTube and on that section of the video. Also, it could, if it's not there, it definitely will be over at hybridministry.xyz. And for this episode, it's /050 because we are on episode, can you believe it, episode 50. Crazy, I know. Also want to remind you that if you would be so kind, we would love a rating or a review. Just sign into your Apple Podcast app if you've been listening for any length of time. It would mean the world to us to have a little review, to hear from the people about what's helpful, what's beneficial, and what you like about this show. And as a token of our appreciation, we will give you our 100% completely free ebook on how to know if you've even ruined your church's TikTok account. By the way, your church probably should be on TikTok. And so if you're not yet, head to the link in the show notes and grab your 100% completely free ebook on knowing if you have ruined your church's TikTok account. But without any further ado, let's dive into what I have learned from NBA head coaches about the upcoming shifting and new generation that's upon us. So what have we learned from the NBA and their head coaches? Like I said, big basketball fan, basketball nut over here. And so there was a recent survey done. It was a player survey. They surveyed as many players as they could. I think something like 500 players. And they asked, what is the coach that you would least like to play for? And the overwhelming winner in that response was Tom Thibodeau of the New York Knicks. And so if you're not a basketball person, let me try to paint the picture for Tibbs. He's sort of this rough and tumble, like old school kind of player. A good example of this, like a reason why, is there's a guy drafted a couple years ago. I'm personally have an affinity for him because he's from the University of Dayton, which again I would widely consider Dayton, Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, that sort of like Southwest Ohio region, my hometown. I lived there for more than half of my life. My wife born and raised there, and so that also helps kind of tie my roots back to there. Anyway, Obi Toppin was a player who played for the University of Dayton. He was drafted to the New York Knicks, and Tom Thibodeau, or nicknamed Tibbs, doesn't play rookies. Like, he just doesn't. And so what's funny is Thibodeau had really big and good success over in Chicago. You might remember Derrick Rose. He was an MVP. Rose played for Thibodeau. Well, a couple years back when they drafted Obi Toppin, he had Rose, who's like the ghost of himself because he's had like multiple knee surgeries, and Taj Gibson, who's like just this older mid-30s player, and those guys are getting all of the playing time. Thibodeau often plays his players upwards of 40-something minutes, and there's only 48 minutes available in a basketball game. And so he really just like locks in on the players that he likes and drives them hard into the ground, and they just play a lot. Now you might be thinking, like, if you want playing time, isn't Thibodeau the guy? And yeah, that may be the case, but in recent years, NBA players have taken on more of a slower approach and a little bit more of like a self-care type approach. Kawhi Leonard has made this famous. He was traded away from the Spurs because he wasn't recovering fast enough, because he needed more time to help heal his body. In fact, Kawhi Leonard does these things where he, and it's made famous by him, but now a lot of players do it. It's called load management. And so if there's like a back-to-back game where like they play one night and they also play the next night, he won't play the next night just to preserve and take care of his body, to make sure that, one, he's fresh for himself, but two, that he's fresh for the playoffs. See, with Tom Thibodeau, almost all that stuff is out the door. And in the 90s, the NBA, there was sort of this mentality, this like bad boys mentality, like you gotta like get in there, be rough and tumble. They refereed the game very differently. You could be a lot more aggressive and dramatic with your contact and the way that you played. And I say all that to say is that Tom Thibodeau would be a great coach, I think, in that era, the bad boys era of 1990s basketball with the Detroit Pistons and Joe Dumars and Isaiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer and Dennis Rodman of the Chicago Bulls. But it's 2023 now, and the game has changed, and it's a much more fluid offensive game. I mean, if you're a basketball person, hang with me if you're not, because we're going to get to some of the implications of this, because this is the only like real basketball-y section right here. But like the new age Warriors, they have completely changed the game, and they don't even run with a traditional center like Draymond Green, who's only like 6'8", 6'9". Draymond Green is running their center position, their tallest player on the floor, and they have 5 guys out who can all shoot. You got like Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and Andrew Wiggins, and Jordan Poole, and all these guys with Draymond in the middle, the only guy who really can't shoot, but he's short, and he's helping facilitate and kicking the ball all to all these places, and it's much more fluid. And what's interesting is that you got their coach, Steve Kerr, who came in and completely reinvented and brought the game to the way that the players wanted it to be. Now, if you're sitting here listening and you're a church leader, you're a pastor, you're a business owner, you're thinking, well, that generation, like this next generation, they need to chill out. They need to stop being so soft and needing things their way. And here's the thing I would just say to you. Like, yes, maybe that is true if they come to work for you in your business, but what do we see? Look around post-COVID. Look at every like donut shop, every drive-through, every burger place. Like, people are not coming back to work. Why? It's not because they don't want to. It probably is because they don't want to, right? But it's not because they don't want to work. They just don't want to work there. They don't want to work for you. They want to work for themselves and make money. I recently heard a podcast of this 19-year-old kid who's out on TikTok making millions and billions of dollars and thousands of followers, and he will probably never go flip a burger over at Burger King. And so while we can be like, those kids, they need to learn this, this, and this, they're not learning that in a traditional workplace. They're out there hacking it for themselves. And so here's the thing. If you are a church leader specifically or a business owner, you have this generation who's out here kind of paving their own way, hacking it for themselves. If you want that generation a part of your organization, you can't be like the NBA, or you can't be like Tom Thibodeau of the NBA, where you just keep doing it your own way because that's the way you've always done it, right? In fact, you need to shift your thinking to start figuring out how you can accommodate that generation. Not because the church is about serving and self-serving and selfishness. And all. It's not about those things. I get it. But if you are a follower of Jesus, you have a mandate to reach every generation with the message and the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that includes Generation Z and By the way, soon to be Generation Alpha, who is already starting to graduate into our youth ministry. Next Sunday, we promote our 5th graders into our 6th grade, and 5th grade is not considered Generation Z. They're considered Generation Alpha. So what that means is our current youth ministry and current college and young adult ministry, that is Gen Z. So pastor, if you're still trying to figure out how to reach millennials, I'm a millennial. I'm mid-30s. Like, they're already the majority of our workforce. They are our current parents of younger kids. You need to start figuring out if you want to reach younger generations. It has shifted, and Gen Z has a very different mindset than a millennial. It can be similar in some ways, but it is different. And so what can we learn? What has the NBA shown us? So I came across an article about 6 things that Generation Z is looking for in their next workplace. So let's power through those different 6 things and take a look at what we can learn from them. All right, so this is an article. It's from Handshake Blog. I'll throw the link in the show notes. I thought it was interesting. I'm going to give them the credit for all of this because they did all the work on it. But I just wanted to provide a little bit of commentary because we're not a workplace, like employment podcast. We're a ministry podcast. So I would say if you're a pastor or church leader listening to this, there are 2 ways to kind of think about this. Way number 1 is think about this from the generations of people that are a part of your ministry. But way number 2 is think about this from the people that you employ at your church. If you want to grow younger and have younger people, younger congregation, and younger staff, specifically and particularly younger staff, I want to encourage you to think about it this way. So number 1, Generation Z is looking for compensation that affords work-life balance. 70% of Gen Z survey respondents say that pay and or compensation is the most important factor. Again, right, let's look back to our NBA analogy. Kawhi Leonard doesn't want to play all 82 regular season games. He wants to play in the playoffs. Now, granted, he doesn't even play in the playoffs anymore. If you're not a basketball person, you won't get that reference, but that's another conversation for another day. But the reality is Gen Z is looking for a better work-life balance. They've looked at their older millennials, Gen X, parents, grandparents, whoever working in the workforce, and they don't want to work that 40-hour-a-week grind. If you spend any amount of time on social media or TikTok, you see people saying like, make 6 figures in like 5 hours a day of work. Like, that is the major hook out there because that's what people want. Is it realistic? I don't know. I think a lot of those things probably require a lot of work and at least a lot of like hustle on the front end. But the reality is they're looking for something that will help serve them to live a more full life. Not because they're lazy, not because they don't want to work, but because they realize that it's not all about work. The second thing is that they want clarity into career paths and internal mobility options. 71% of respondents expect to be promoted between 6 months to a year and a half. 64% attend career events to ensure that there are growth and development opportunities. What does this mean for a church? Well, first of all, if you're employing them at a church, they want to look around and see if there's ways to move up. What do most churches do? Most churches don't have ways to move up. In fact, one of the times I left one of my jobs is it was me and the senior pastor. We were the only 2 full-time pastors on staff. And I looked around and I said, there is no way that I will ever get a chance to move up here. Like, we have to hire like an adult discipleship pastor. We'll have to hire an executive pastor. We'll have to hire a college ministry pastor or associate. Like, I will not get a chance to move up until we make several other hires. And at the trajectory at that point, I had been working there for 5 years. I was like, that is not going to happen anytime soon. And the same, I would say, is going to be true of Generation Z in working for your church, but also attending your church. Where can they insert themselves into leadership? If leadership is only reserved for old people, like of a certain ethnicity people, maybe, like look around at your leadership board. What is the youngest elder that you have? There's a stat out there. I don't know where it's from, so I can't credit it, but I think it might be from like some church growth type stuff. They say that a church congregation generally is within 10 years on either side of the senior pastor's age. So if you have a 55-year-old senior pastor, you are most well positioned to reach 45 to 65-year-olds. Think about that. Now, how are you going to reach a 25-year-old? Well, that's a youth pastor's job. Not really. A youth pastor's job is to help serve the kids of the 45 to 65-year-olds that are being brought to the church in most cases. And that's, 11 to 18-year-olds, not 25-year-olds. Well, we'll make him be in charge of college ministry too. A, that's a gigantic job. I'll tell you that as a youth pastor. But B, oftentimes, I heard this analogy one time. A friend of mine, he worked for GE, and he said that GE used to be in the dishwasher business, and they gave cheap, crappy dishwashers to apartment complexes. Like, they struck a deal, and they served the majority of apartment complexes, and they were GE dishwashers, and they sucked, he said. And he said they always broke. And he said because of that, because most people would start out in their first apartment with a crappy GE dishwasher, they all had a bad taste of GE because all their dishwashers broke. And he said, is that what's going on in college ministry? They get the bottom of the barrel, the lowest rung. They don't often get like their own minister or like paid full-time staff person or anything like that. And if they do get a paid person, it's like a very, very part-time person who's basically a glorified small group leader. Is that why young people are leaving the church in droves? Because they're getting the lowest rung, bottom of the barrel. And why do they get that? Probably because they're the least generous in contributions and giving. And so I hate to say this, but if churches are looking at like an ROI thing, like the lowest ROI from like financial gifts is coming from the young adult ministry. That being said, they're the future of your church. So if you don't find a way to invest in them, they're not going to be there in the years to come when the 45 to 65 to 75 to 85-year-olds are no longer living in your church and giving in your church. So how are you going to reach and help promote and provide inroads for that generation to promote up into leadership? The third thing is they're looking for a modernized approach to benefits with an emphasis on flexibility and mental health. This goes with what we've been talking about a little bit before. 73% of survey respondents said that benefits is the number one reason why they would stick with an employer. Healthcare is the most important benefit of that, according to 76% of the respondents, and 73% said that they are looking for a flexible schedule. I would say that flexible schedule piece, that's where this hybrid idea comes from, right? Like one of the main things about this hybrid kind of ministry, in person and digital, is flexibility. Can we provide flexibility in how people can grow in their faith? Number 4, they're looking for community, culture, and collaboration, even in remote settings. Strong peer relationships, 63% say feeling a part of the organization, and 57% are key early reasons why early talent would choose to stay with an employer. Does your church offer younger generations community, culture, and collaboration? If you're set up like most churches, you offer a program. Hey, we got the young adult college ministry. It meets on Sunday morning during the second service. So there it is, right? And does that community actually act like a community? Those are the questions I think that we as church leaders should be asking ourselves. Number 5, committing publicly to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. 55% of respondents say that a commitment to DEIB is extremely important when evaluating an employer. They're looking for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. That's really valuable to Generation Z. So again, I'll say, look at your board, go to your staff page. Is there diversity? Is there equity? Is there inclusion? Is there belonging shown there? If not, they're going to be looking for a church staff or church leadership that embraces those values. And then finally, number 6, accountability. Actually, let me go back before I say that. I had an intern a couple years ago at church, and diversity was really important to him. And we tried really, really hard to hire this kid. He was a stud, man. He was a rock star. And his like number 1 or number 2 knock on not wanting to come to our church. One, he was from LA, we were in Chicago, so like that was a big one. But the number 1A, or maybe even more than that, but he wouldn't say it, or I mean, he was honest with us. But the other thing he was like just basically saying was like, there is no diversity here. And he was like, and I don't mean diversity with door greeters and people on the platform. I mean diversity in leadership. And I mean, it was a profound statement. and one that honestly I don't even know that trickled up to upper level leadership. Like, I don't know if that phrase ever got there, but the reality of it is, like, that's what he was looking for, and he didn't see it, and he didn't see a path forward to it, and we lost out on an amazing, talented, kid. So that's just another example. All right. Number 6, accountability on the environment, sustainability, and social responsibility. 78% of Generation Z survey respondents, they attend career events to ensure the role and responsibilities aligned with their interests and values. 51% attend to ensure that the company aligns with their interests and values. So these are the things that matter to them, and these are the things that they're looking for. Yes, in workplaces, so if they want to work at your church, but also in organizations that they're going to choose to attach themselves to. So with that being said, I have 3 kind of takeaways, 3 learnings I think that are important for us as a church to understand and to explore. Let's dive in. Learning number 1, 51% of Generation Z say that their ultimate goal in life is happiness. Now, before you're like, that's not what a Christian's goal should be, I agree with you. I agree that a Christian's goal should be love and joy and peace and patience and the fruits of the Spirit. But if our target audience is saying that over half of them are looking for happiness, how are we going to help facilitate some of that for them? Listen to some of these things too. This is from survey from Barna of people, Generation Z, and some of their coping mechanisms. Okay, so just think about this in light of your church. And I'm not giving commentary or creating like a roadmap or a like thing that you should do as a result of this. This is more just interesting coping mechanisms, the way that Generation Z is choosing to spend their time. So the most common coping mechanisms are connected with non-family members at 45%, connected with family 20%, and with music at 18%. So here are some of their quotes. TikTok. They're people feeling the same way as me, and that makes me feel less lonely. Another one, I will disappear into a world of my own, whether one I make myself or one that has already been created already, like books, shows, or games. Doing one of my hobbies, such as writing or violin, a good beat in a song. I find solace in social media. I like to be alone, sometimes because it's peaceful and it's zen to me. I like to have conversations with the important people in my life. By opening up to them, I receive positive affirmation and validation that I am not alone. I like to do comforting activities. Reading fantasy books, I like to imagine myself as the main character because they're usually the ones with the perfect life. Sitting down to a single-player game with a good story. Looking in the mirror and saying affirmations. Getting on my bike and going for a ride. I like to send memes to my friends and then we will discuss them. Sleeping until the loneliness goes away. I watch videos of concerts on my phones. Playing with my many pets. They are my world. Those are some of the most common coping mechanisms out of Generation Z. And I just wonder if we read those as older church leaders and think those sound ridiculous. Maybe, but how are we showing up in some of these ways for our younger attenders that we're looking to reach and have be a part of our church? Idea number 2 that I think we as church should be at least aware of is honesty is one of the most important things as it pertains to Generation Z, especially teenagers, but Generation Z as a whole. I mean, we saw that, right, in that Handshake article. They want not only good pay, but they want transparency in pay. Like, that is what's most important. So in a recent Barna study, these 5 categories were given to Gen Z and to teenagers about what's important, what traits are important as it pertains to belief. And those were being correct, being knowledgeable, being open to new ideas, being curious, and being honest. The number 1 far and away area that was most important was being honest. So we have broken down different categories, all of Gen Z, teenagers, and young adults. So I'm going to read to you the statistics of each of those from those three categories. So in being correct, only 8% of all of Gen Z cared about it, 6% of teens cared about it, and 9% of young adults cared about it. Being knowledgeable, 21% of the entire scope of Gen Z cared about it, 16% of teens cared about it, and 24% of young adults cared about it. Being open to new ideas, 28% of Gen Z cared about it, 29% of teenagers cared about it, and 28% of young adults cared about it. Being curious, 11% of Gen Z cared about it, 7% of teenagers cared about it, and 13% of young adults cared about it. But being honest, 32% of Gen Z cared about it, 41% of teenagers cared about it, and 25% of young adults cared about being honest. Honesty with one's belief is of utmost importance to Gen Z, specifically and especially to teenagers. So how can we create an environment in our organizations, in our churches, that are more open and more honest? The final area that I think that matters for churches is that churches, Gen Z young adults, they care about justice, they care about equality, they care about diversity. So some of the top ways that churches can address injustice, this is what justice-motivated, justice-oriented, and justice-neutral Generation Z categorizers said. All right, so they said that encouraging people to address injustice. 31% of justice motivated, 28% of justice oriented, and 18% of justice neutral said that the number one way that people could address this was to simply walk into it, right? Go towards the injustice. The top ways that the church can do it. Other like options that were given to them in the survey were by advocating for meaningful change, by welcoming people into a local church, by creating relationships with people who are experiencing injustice, and by teaching that the Bible encourages special kindness to people who are experiencing injustice. So again, of those last four, the one that was most highly selected was simply by addressing it. So church leaders, church social media people, youth pastors, whoever's listening to this, the generation that's not a part of your church is most looking for you to address areas of injustice. I know that it's a difficult area to wade into. I know that it's polarizing. I know that it can get political. And you can tick off some of the 65-year-old members who sit all day and watch news media, and they'll tell you that this is an agenda from the left or an agenda from the right. But the reality is this is what's important to our younger congregants and congregation members. So what are we going to do? How are we going to reach them? And honesty and openness and justice motivation and helping them experience what they would view as happiness. Like, these are the things that they are looking for. How can we as a church lean into this and help create the types of environments that these types of people will go to? Because if we're not careful, we're going to become like Tom Thibodeau, head coach of the New York Knicks, who's out of touch, who no one wants to play for, and no one wants to go be a part of the team. Like, literally, the majority of the NBA players don't want to go play for him. Is that the way that younger generations, young adults, and Gen Z is looking at your church? And your church right now, I'm just going to be honest, your church can get away with keeping on doing things the way that they've always been done. Because the majority of the people that you or a pastor, senior pastor, are going to surround themselves with are going to be the people that say it and do it and are okay with the way that things have always been done. And that may work for you for the next 5 or 10 years, but what about in 10, 15, 20 years? When Generation Z is no longer 19, 20, but they're 25, 30, and they haven't been in your church for the last 10 years because you haven't done anything to help reach them. And they're off experiencing faith in some other community in some other way. See, here's the reality. Gen Z is not out on Jesus. They are out on institutionalized faith and religion, and I think it's because of some of these reasons. I hope you found this episode helpful. I know in a few ways it stepped on my toes. I just want to encourage you, don't give up. Keep leaning in. The next generation needs you. And if you are the only person in your church advocating for hybrid, remember, that is a value of the next generation. we and you and I, we may not have all the answers, and that's okay. But what we are doing is we are trying our best to figure out the best way to create flexibility, honesty, coping mechanisms, justice-oriented content that's going to help make our church one that a younger person is at least aware of and at least excited about being a part of. Thanks so much for hanging in there. Love to have you a part of this journey. Make sure you head to the show notes for full transcripts of this. Show notes, links, resources, all that type of stuff. I'll have some of those graphs and the stats that I've mentioned. All of that is available in the show notes. Go ahead there, leave a rating or a review. We would love to talk with you. Love to see you over on YouTube or on my TikTok. But until next time, and as always, stay hybrid.